I remember about a week ahead of time, all of us were getting together talking about it because it looked bad on everything we were looking at, all the computer models and everything. And then from that day, let's say that was 7 days out, every succeeding day, some other piece of evidence came in that made it look all the more sure that it was going to happen and be bad. And this kept going right up to the day of the event. Then we had the morning storms. And then they sent up a special sounding from the National Weather Service in Calera. And it showed spin values, or helicity is the term we use, being through the roof. And at that point is when I told our news director at the time, I said, this looks to be historic. I mean, this number is completely out of hand. And I just think we're going to be in for a horrible afternoon and night. If you think back to the really bad events, April 3rd, 1974, which hit mostly northwest Alabama, Marion County included, though, also hit Walker County very badly, and some surrounding areas, Fayette County too. And that was a terrible, terrible night. Between 80 and 85 people lost their lives. And then you can go to Smithfield, 1977. That was one tornado, though. It wasn't an outbreak like the April 3rd of 74 was. And so you go through periods in which it's really busy and agitated, and you will get maybe several outbreaks, but there's always one that stands out kind of. And it seems like it is generational, you know, every 20, 30 years, something like that. At some point it will happen again. We know that, and that's why we talk about safety effects. You know, one of the things I remember from that day too, going through the morning and then leading into the afternoon stuff, it was all meteorological. You know, you're looking at all the maps and the computer models and the radar. It became visceral for me. I forget the exact time, but it probably is about when Pleasant Grove was being hit, maybe Pratt City. But I remember photojournalist Jamie Bryant came in from the parking lot, and he's carrying building materials. He had shingles and roof insulation and stuff like that, and he brought it over to me in the chroma key. And that's when it hit me, and it went from being scientific or meteorological to being personal. You realize at that point that people's lives were being torn apart. And it was so hard from that point on to look at it any other way. And you kind of knew that's what was happening, but then when you see that kind of evidence, and keep in mind as the crow flies, we were a good 5, 6, 7 miles from where the tornado was. It might have been hitting Pleasant Grove, and that stuff goes up in the chimney and then gets taken out all over the place some distance away from the tornado. That happened about the time we saw the big storm north of the high-rises. The warnings have improved since I've been in the business. I mean, it's totally turned around. It's hard to believe, but back up through the early 1950s, not only did the Weather Service not issue tornado warnings, they were forbidden to issue them. There was a rule saying, don't even try. Don't do it, because we can't do it. And a few of the meteorologists, one of whom became a real favorite of mine on Philadelphia television for a while, Wally Canaan, kept insisting, no, we can at least make an effort at this. We may not be very good in the beginning, but we'll get better. And they did some test forecasts at some places in Oklahoma, and they were okay. And that started it all. And later on, after Worcester, Massachusetts was hit by a terrible storm in 1954, and in those days, so much of the political clout in the country was over the Northeast, they're like, we can't have this happen. And that's when the Storm Prediction Center was born. So weather history has changed so much. And I'll tell you, I'm amazed at what everybody's able to do now in terms of forecasting. It's so much better than it used to be. And perhaps just as importantly as being accurate with the tornadoes is avoiding those situations which are not tornadoes. The false alarm rate or the perceived false alarm rate, they've made a tremendous effort to get better at that. And we know, I mean, if you issue too many warnings of anything, it becomes like wallpaper. You just live with it and you don't pay attention to it. So you have to limit the number of cases in which you issue a warning and there's no tornado. And I think they've done a very good job. My hat's off to the Weather Service. I know they work very hard during these events. And now they work so hard after them with the storm surveys. That goes on for days, if not weeks. So just think about the easiest way to get from your bedroom to the basement. If you do that ahead of time, it may not be so much panic time when the actual storm comes. And then when a warning is issued, what you don't want to do is take some time to figure out where the storm is and whatnot. If a warning is issued for your area, we want you to get to your place of safety right away. Now, if you're there in your place of safety and you have a TV you can watch, you have a NOAA weather radio, that's great. But get there first. Make that priority number one. Of course, in the old days, we told people to open up all the windows. We know that makes no difference, so just ignore all that kind of stuff. If you have a bicycle helmet, a motorcycle helmet, a football helmet. Have that in your place of safety, because that can really protect you. You know, you just thought back to earlier in the day after we saw Cahaba Heights get hit and so forth. And the morning, admittedly, was under forecast. We didn't expect it to be that bad. We knew there was some threat, but we didn't think it would be that bad. And then just the pieces of evidence kept building to making it worse and worse. And then when you see all this damage and then you start hearing about the loss of life and whatnot, it makes you heartsick, because you think, wasn't there something more I could have done? To see that tremendous loss of life. I mean, from a human standpoint, that was probably the worst day Alabama has ever had. I mean, there was the storm back in 1920 that killed more people, but in 1920 there were no TVs, there were no weather radio. The Weather Service didn't forecast tornadoes. There was hardly any telephones, really, when you think about it. And over 300 people passed away, but given our level of technology now, to lose over 200 people in one event, it just made you sick. I remember about a week and a half later, NOAA arrived, National Weather Service arrived, and we all went into the conference room. And we talked a bit back and forth. There were several meteorologists. A couple of us were here from the station. And after about 10 minutes, he said, all right, everybody put their pens and pencils down. And he just said, why did so many people die that day? And because they were shocked. Because the Weather Service, frankly, in terms of warnings, I don't think they could have done a better job. It was incredible. It was amazing. And I think everybody, all the stations did a great job of communicating it, and to still lose that many people. But we have to realize that highly populated areas being hit by that kind of strength of tornadoes doesn't happen very often. You can get an EF4 tornado, if it stays over the countryside, it doesn't really do anything. But you had Tuscaloosa, the Shoal Creek Valley, all these places were hit directly, Pratt City. I remember going to Pratt City a few days after the storm hit, and I was in tears. I mean, it just looked like houses were just picked up and thrown away. And you just feel bad for all the people and what they were going through. I think it had been long enough since that kind of an event happened. It's kind of like the pandemic, frankly. You know, it's the previous one goes so far back 100 years, none of us have any experience with it. And in the case of tornadoes, very quickly people move on. Well, you have to move on with your life. And I just think it's the kind of thing that doesn't happen that frequently, and so it's easy to lose your bearings and to realize, you know, how serious it can be. The other thing is this, and this might be the one thing we can still work on in terms of forecasting. Occasionally we may miss an EF0 or EF1 tornado, and hopefully no one gets hurt. And that's not necessarily all bad, because if we warn for every one of those weak tornadoes, it does to some extent dilute the really bad days. On April 27th, every meteorologist wanted everybody to heed every warning. We wanted everybody to change their plans and so forth. You can't do that on a day in which there's a marginal risk, because there'll be so many days of the year you don't do anything. Your kids don't go to school, you don't go grocery shopping, you don't go to work. So we've got to find a way to delineate the really terrible days in which you got to do something from the days that are very, very slight risk. I think we've done a tremendous job. People here are very resilient. I mean, from a weather standpoint, we put up with a lot. We do. There are a lot of places in the country that have a bad season of some kind. Maybe it's tornado season, maybe it's hurricane season, maybe it's the wintertime with snowstorms. We kind of have it all year long. I mean, most September days are very nice, but every once in a while a hurricane comes up in September. And I think people have recovered very nicely. And having taken my car around a little bit, the most heartening thing was seeing a new storm shelter that's about a half mile from where we're standing now. So people took action, and they'll be ready for the next one. Going into that shelter will save their lives if there's a bad tornado again. That's not an advantage they had 10 years ago.